After the clerk called my name, the courtroom went silent. That kind of silence that makes you aware of every breath. I tightened my grip on the folder in my lap, the one that held copies of deeds, bank statements, and a prenuptial agreement stamped in blue ink. Then the door creaked open. Daniel walked in smiling as if he were strolling into a family reunion, not a divorce hearing. Beside him was a woman with a rounded belly. She moved slowly, one hand pressed to her side, the other, sliding into the crook of his arm. I heard the murmurs ripple through the benches, the way gossip spreads in a church after a shocking sermon. Daniel cleared his throat, patted the woman's hand, and raised his chin toward me. With a baby on the way, he announced loudly enough for the judge to hear, "I deserve half of Evelyn's $1 million estate." My chest went tight. I looked down at the edge of the folder, digging into my palm. $1 million estate. He loved the sound of it. To him, my savings, the apartment I bought with years of 14-hour days, the inheritance from my aunt's modest trust, those were not pieces of my life, but tokens to be snatched up. The judge raised a brow but said nothing yet. The bailiff shifted clearly, suppressing a smirk. I sat motionless. Inside, though, I felt that flicker of cold fire I have always carried. The same fire that kept me going when Daniel first failed his business venture, then the second, then left me to cover credit card bills in my name. Daniel's little performance played out like cheap theater. He guided the woman to a seat, brushed her hair back gently as though cameras were flashing. He let out a weary sigh, exactly the kind of sound meant to draw pity. And pity is powerful in a courtroom. I thought of my mother's voice 2 nights before. "Sweetheart, just settle. He is going to be a father now. You don't want that on your conscience." I could still hear her words coated with guilt. She wanted peace, not justice. "Mom," I'd said, pinching the bridge of my nose, "that child isn't mine to claim or support. Daniel made his choices. I am not paying for them." She had gone quiet after that, a silence heavy with disappointment. Now here he was milking sympathy. He even let a little smile curl on his lips, as if to say, "Checkmate." But what Daniel didn't know was this. I had already seen the cracks in his plan. Still, humiliation has its sting. The spectators, the clerks, even strangers, waiting for their own cases, all staring, whispering. A woman alone against a man with a pregnant partner, it painted me cold, unfeeling. I could feel the judgment pressing against my back. I inhaled deeply, glanced at my attorney Harper beside me. She leaned in whispering, "Stay calm. Let him talk himself into a corner." Harper always wore a calm smile, the kind that unsettled opponents. I nodded once. The judge tapped his gavel lightly. "We will proceed." Daniel's lawyer, barely out of law school, from the look of him, stood with trembling hands. "Your Honor, my client has been left destitute. He is unemployed with a dependent on the way. He cannot be expected to live without fair support from his former spouse, who holds significant assets, including a property valued at over $1 million and extensive financial accounts." I could almost recite the speech with him. It was the same sob story Daniel had rehearsed a dozen times before abandoned man, cruel woman with money, the need for fairness. I said nothing. Silence can be louder than words. What no one in the room yet knew was that Daniel's timeline made no sense, and Harper had evidence in her briefcase that would break the illusion like glass dropped on marble. But that revelation that was, for later. For now, I sat still, folder balanced on my lap, eyes fixed forward. Let them think me cold. Let them whisper. Families and money always explode in courtrooms. This was just the opening blast. Tell me, where are you watching from? Because what happened next is the reason people still write to me about betrayal, humiliation, and revenge. The night before the hearing, I sat alone in my apartment overlooking the Hudson, staring at the reflection of city lights on the glass. My phone lit up with my mother's name. I knew the conversation before answering. Still, I pressed the green button. "Sweetheart," she began, her voice already heavy with fatigue, "I want you to think about settling tomorrow." I closed my eyes, listening to the clink of a boat's bell somewhere on the river. "Mom, we had a prenuptial agreement. This estate, the savings, even the inheritance from Aunt Claire, it's mine. Daniel has no claim." "But he's going to be a father," she said, layering the words with guilt. "Do you want that on your conscience? A baby in the world and no support from you." I nearly laughed at the absurdity. "It isn't my baby, Mom. He cheated. Remember the credit card bills I had to cover? Remember the late-night calls when creditors harassed me? If I believed for 1 second that child was mine, he wouldn't need to pull these stunts. I would take responsibility." She didn't answer right away. I could hear her breathing, then the faint scrape of her chair against the kitchen floor. I just want peace, Evelyn. I don't want to see this get uglier than it already island. I ended the call politely but firmly, then placed the phone face down on the table. Peace, she said. Easy for her to wish when she wasn't the one who had been humiliated, lied to, and nearly bankrupted. The next morning, as I dressed in a navy suit, another blow landed. A cousin forwarded me a screenshot from the family group chat. Daniel had slipped into it, apparently still on speaking terms with several relatives. His message scrolled in bold letters, Evelyn's heartless. She would rather guard her $1 million apartment than think of an innocent child. Below, my aunt had replied with a praying hands emoji. My uncle wrote, "She's cold as ice. Poor Daniel." And then the sharpest cut of all, my sister. "She's always been about money first, people last." I stared at the screen, the words blurring. I had given that sister money when she couldn't pay her rent. I had co-signed a loan once to help her start a boutique. Yet here she was branding me the villain for refusing to bankroll Daniel's latest con. Humiliation sat in my chest like a stone. Betrayal followed quickly after. Family siding with the man who had drained me for years, all because he now draped an arm around a pregnant belly. Later that day, I met Harper at her office. She pushed a folder across the table, her nails tapping once on the cover. Inside were printouts, emails, bank statements, receipts. Proof Daniel had been entangled with the woman long before we separated, proof of hotel stays, transfers of money, even a half-written business pitch he had tried to fund through her. "Let him play the victim," Harper said, her calm voice carrying steel. "The more dramatic he gets, the better for us. The judge will ask the only question that matters. And when he does, Daniel's story will crumble." I exhaled slowly, tracing the edge of the folder. Still, the sting of my family's betrayal lingered. The echo of their words followed me, even as I prepared to face Daniel in court. But what they didn't know was this. I had already made my decision. I would not bend. Not to Daniel, not to his theatrics, not even to the family that branded me heartless. And when the truth came out, when Daniel's performance collapsed, every one of them would have to reckon with the reality they chose to ignore. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood polish and coffee that had been reheated too many times. I arrived early, folder tucked under my arm heels, clicking against the marble floor. Harper met me at the entrance, her briefcase in one hand, her smile steady. "Today is about patience," she whispered as we climbed the stairs. "Let him talk. Let him stumble. We only need one crack to pull the whole wall down." Inside the courtroom, Daniel was already performing. He wore a suit. He had probably borrowed a navy jacket slightly too tight across his shoulders. His new partner sat beside him, hand resting dramatically on her stomach, as if the child inside were already a co-plaintiff. Daniel kept brushing her hair behind her ear, sighing heavily, glancing toward the judge with eyes that begged for sympathy. His lawyer stood to make the opening plea. Barely 30 nervous, he spoke with the rhythm of someone who had memorized the script but not the meaning. "Your Honor, my client has been left without means. He faces unemployment debts and a dependent child on the way. Meanwhile, Mrs. Carter," he nodded in my direction, "maintains significant wealth, an apartment valued at over $1 million, large savings accounts and inheritance funds. It would be unjust for her to prosper while he struggles." I sat still, but my heart hammered. The words were expected, yet hearing them aloud still cut. My life's work, my careful saving, reduced to a prize he felt entitled to. Harper rose, calmly smoothing her blazer. "We sympathize with Mr. Carter's difficulties," she said evenly, "but we must examine facts, not theater." Her eyes slid briefly toward Daniel and back. "Facts will determine this case, and facts are stubborn things." The judge nodded, motioning for her to continue later. Daniel leaned back in his chair, smirk playing on his lips. He thought he was winning. Midway through the hearing, he produced a photograph from his pocket, a sonogram. He passed it to his lawyer, who raised it like evidence of divine intervention. "This child is real," the young attorney declared, "and deserves support." Whispers fluttered across the benches. I felt the heat rise in my face, but Harper remained unmoved. She simply tilted her head as though listening to a child explain a tall tale. Then Daniel made his mistake. He slid another document across the table, a receipt supposedly from a clinic visit dated during our marriage. I saw it, recognized instantly the alteration. The numbers misaligned, the ink slightly different where the date had been changed. A clumsy forgery, but dangerous if unchecked. I lowered my gaze, reached into my folder, and slipped Harper a small flash drive. On it were files I had gathered quietly over the past months, copies of Daniel's emails, transactions, even text messages he had forgotten to delete from our shared cloud account. Harper's eyes flicked down at the drive, then back up. She gave the faintest nod. The rest of the session blurred with arguments, objections, and sighs. Daniel's lawyer leaned heavily on emotion, painting him as a ruined man abandoned by a cold, wealthy wife. I listened silent, my fingers pressing into the edge of the folder until the cardboard bent. Patience, Harper had said. And patience, I reminded myself, is a weapon. By the time the judge called for recess, Daniel was smiling broadly, shaking hands with his lawyer, as though victory were inevitable. I walked past him without a glance, but inside I burned. He had just set the stage for his own downfall. And Harper, calm as ever, whispered as we stepped into the hallway, "Tomorrow we bring the question. And when we do, everything changes." The next morning, the courthouse felt heavier. The benches were full word, having spread about Daniel's dramatic claim. A few reporters loitered near the doors, scribbling notes as we passed. I sat with Harper at our table, the same folder balanced on my lap, though by now it was more symbol than necessity. Daniel entered with his partner again, playing his role to perfection. He guided her to her seat, pausing just long enough for everyone to notice the curve of her belly. He sighed, pressed her hand, then looked toward me with a smirk that said, "Watch me win." The judge raised his gavel. "Proceed." Daniel's young lawyer stood, his voice stronger than the day before, though the tremor had not vanished. "Your Honor, my client has endured hardship beyond measure. He was abandoned, left with nothing, while Mrs. Carter continues to enjoy wealth, an estate valued over $1 million, sizable accounts, and luxury beyond what he could dream. Now, with a child on the way, how can it be just to deny him support?" His words floated heavy in the room. Daniel's partner sniffled on cue, pressing a tissue to her cheek. I stared at the table in front of me, heartbeat steady, waiting. The judge turned slightly toward Harper. "Counselor." She rose, adjusted her blazer, and stepped forward with measured calm. "Your Honor, while we respect the court's time and sympathize with difficult circumstances, we must ask one simple question before any further argument." Her voice carried evenly, slicing through the drama. She turned to Daniel, her gaze unwavering. "Who is the father of this child?" The room stilled. Even the reporters at the back lowered their pens. Daniel blinked, rapidly caught off guard. His lawyer hesitated, then stammered, "My client believes it is." "Believes," Harper repeated, her tone sharpened just enough to cut. "This court does not deal in belief. It deals in evidence." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a printed email, clipped neatly to a timeline of receipts. She held it aloft, the paper trembling slightly in the still air. Here, she said, we have correspondence between Mr. Carter and Miss Reynolds dated 3 months before his separation from Mrs. Carter. In it, Mr. Carter confirms a trip, a hotel stay, and most telling, the expected due date of a child. A due date that makes his claim mathematically impossible. The judge leaned forward. "Is this verified?" "Yes, Your Honor," Harper replied. "Emails obtained legally from shared accounts. Dates corroborated with receipts." A low murmur surged through the benches. Daniel's partner shifted uncomfortably, her face flushing deep red. Daniel's smirk collapsed. I didn't know," he muttered. His lawyer scrambled for words, but none came. The judge tapped his gavel sharply. Silence, his eyes fixed on Daniel. "Mr. Carter, this court will not be manipulated with fabricated claims. Your credibility is in question." I lifted my eyes for the first time that morning, meeting Daniel's across the room. There was no triumph in my gaze, only the cold acknowledgement of truth finally laid bare. The room buzzed with whispers. Someone in the back stifled a laugh. For the first time since this ordeal began, Daniel looked small, cornered, pale, humiliated. His partner pulled her hand from his arm. The gavel struck again. "We will reconvene after lunch," the judge said, "but let it be clear this court requires facts, not performances." As people filed out, I remained seated, breathing evenly. This was not victory yet, but it was the moment the tide turned. And what no one in that room realized, at least not yet, was that Daniel's public unraveling had only just begun. Word travels fast when pride meets folly. By the time I reached the sidewalk that afternoon, the marble steps of the courthouse were crowded with phones, held high screens, glowing like tiny lanterns against the gray sky. Someone had leaked a clip of Harper's cross-examination, and the phrase, "fake baby scam," began circling social media, like gulls over a fishing boat. I tucked my folder under my arm and kept walking. The city felt different, charged, almost humming. At the corner, a young reporter trotted beside me, microphone thrust forward. "Mrs. Carter," he said, slightly breathless, "any comment on the revelation that your ex-husband may have fabricated paternity to claim half your estate?" I paused long enough to look him in the eye. "Facts speak for themselves," I said, voice steady, then continued toward the parking garage. The clip appeared online within minutes. My calm answer the reporter's flushed excitement traffic rolling past. Viewers ate it up. Something about quiet certainty appeals to people who have been fed too many loud lies. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, tea steeping beside my laptop, watching numbers climb. First 10,000 views, then 50, then 100. My sister, who had called me cold-hearted 2 days before, sent a hurried message. I had no idea he was lying. "Hope you're okay." I closed the chat without answering. Some wounds need silence more than salve. By midnight, talk show hosts were trading jokes at Daniel's expense. They reenacted the forged receipt, complete with dramatic gasps. One commentator held up a stuffed pillow under his shirt, waddling across the stage while the audience roared. A tabloid website ran a headline that read, "Would-be gold digger digs own grave." Under it, a slideshow compared Daniel's earlier lavish vacation photos to the grim face he wore leaving court. They circled the difference in red, but I still saw no triumph in it, only the plain cost of deceit. Daniel tried to seize control of the narrative. He recorded a video in low light claiming persecution, corporate greed, a conspiracy of wealthy lawyers. The upload backfired. Viewers flagged inconsistencies faster than he could speak them. Comment after comment called him out, quoting Harper's timeline linking to clinic records that contradicted his story. Some posts were ruthless, others almost clinical in the way they dissected each lie. The crowd had turned scholar overnight, and Daniel was their case study. I should have felt vindicated, perhaps even joyful. Instead, I experienced a quieter emotion relief, like slipping off a coat that had grown far too heavy. His humiliation was not my goal. Truth was. Still, truth tends to drag pride behind it on a rope. The next morning, the woman who had stood beside Daniel in court appeared alone at a downtown cafe. A freelance photographer captured her wiping tears with a napkin while staring at her phone. The image spread quickly. Anonymous sources reported that she had left Daniel's apartment before dawn, suitcase in hand. Soon after she filed a brief statement through her own attorney, she had been unaware of Daniel's marital deception and would seek child support as a single parent. The public, always eager for a redemption arc, offered her sympathy almost as swiftly as they had mocked her. Daniel's spiral accelerated. Creditors who had tolerated his delays now sensed blood in the water. Letters demanding payment flooded his mailbox. One afternoon, a tow truck arrived, hauling away the car he loved to polish on weekends. A neighbor recorded the scene, posted it online with a caption about karma, and views again skyrocketed. Meanwhile, Harper filed a motion requesting expedited judgment. Daniel, stripped of credibility, had little ground left on which to stand. His lawyer petitioned to withdraw from the case, citing irreconcilable differences with the client's version of events. Rumor said the young attorney's firm threatened disciplinary action if he stayed. No firm survives by anchoring itself to a sinking ship. Even my mother, faithful peacekeeper, called to apologize. Her voice quivered through the receiver. "I should have trusted you," she said. "We all should have." I listened, then told her I loved her because love and disappointment often share the same seat at the family table. Forgiveness, though, would need time. In quieter moments, I walked along the river coat, drawn tight against early spring wind. Birds skimmed the water, fairy horns echoed, and for the first time in months, my shoulders lowered away from my ears. Humiliation had done its work, not mine, but his. And yet, I knew the saga was not finished. Public judgment is loud, but legal judgment is final, and we still awaited the gavel's last word. One evening, as dusk settled violet over the skyline, I received an email from an old college friend, a single sentence and a link. "Look what made the nightly news." I clicked. There on screen was the judge's stern face, reading a statement about egregious attempts to defraud the court and respect for marital contracts. The anchor summarized the upcoming penalties for perjury, hinted at possible criminal charges. Daniel's name now belonged to late-night comedians, morning talk shows, investigative podcasts. The court of public opinion can feel merciless, but I reminded myself he had carried his own rope, tied his own knot. I did not need to tug. Still, I sent a brief thank you note to Harper, handwritten on cream stationery. "Patience won," I wrote, "and stubborn facts. She replied with a single sentence. On to the next round. Because revenge, the real kind, is rarely a single blow. It is a series of doors closing gently but firmly until the person who once swaggered finds every exit sealed. And as Daniel would soon discover, the next door was the one he feared most, the courtroom he had tried to manipulate, now turning its full attention to his history of fraud. But that is a story for another day, and we were not finished writing it yet. 2 days after the judge's rebuke, I woke before dawn, the city still hushed, windows black, except for the river barges creeping south. I brewed coffee, its scent, mingling with cold morning air, and opened the envelope Harper had messengered the night before. Inside lay the signed order. The court recognized the prenuptial agreement in full, denied Daniel's petition for spousal support, and scheduled a separate hearing to address sanctions for attempted fraud. The language was formal, almost distant, yet each clause felt like a door locking behind me, sealing the past where it belonged. I read the order twice, then slipped it into the bottom drawer of my desk. My phone buzzed Harper again. Congratulations, time to live forward. I typed a simple reply. Agreed. Then I dressed, choosing a charcoal coat and low boots that could carry me through any weather, and headed out into the pale light. At 9, I met Rini, a broker whose calm matched Harper's. We stood atop a Kiet penthouse on Riverside Drive, glass walls framing water like a moving painting. Sunlight splashed off the Hudson. Tugboats left white wakes that unraveled behind them like loose thread. Renee watched me walk the terrace, hands folded. The seller accepted your offer, she said. Voice low, professional. All cash, no contingencies. They were impressed. I nodded, fingers brushing the stone railing. Buying a home is usually a decision made slowly, but sometimes life delivers a moment when speed itself becomes clarity. Daniel had tried to strip me of security. I would answer by staking a flag of permanence on my own terms. We signed in a conference room downstairs. Ink flowed across paper, each signature a declaration. I do not owe my triumph to anyone's pity. When Renee slid the final document forward, I paused, remembering nights I ate canned soup to pay down loans while Daniel schemed for easy money. Then I wrote my name one more time. The sale was done. I did not celebrate with champagne or confetti. Instead, I walked to a quiet diner on Broadway, ordered oatmeal and black coffee, and watched pedestrians hurry by. A preacher on the corner lifted his arms to the cold sky sermon rising above taxi horns. A group of teenagers laughed as they chased a wind-tossed napkin. Ordinary life, unbothered by scandal or courts. That ordinariness felt like luxury. Yet revenge, true revenge, is not merely living well. It is demonstrating that deceit cannot rewrite another person's story. Late afternoon, I drafted a statement for the press. Harper helped refine the language, removing every sharp edge until only truth remained. At 6 under slate clouds that threatened rain, I read it aloud from the lobby of my new building. I stand here today to affirm a principle I said, voice echoing against marble. Responsibility is real, manipulation is not. Let this outcome encourage anyone who has been pressured to surrender hard-earned security, patience, and fact can prevail. I answered 2 brief questions, thanked the reporters, and stepped into the elevator. Cameras flashed until the doors cut them off. In the privacy of the lift, I exhaled. My hands trembled not with fear, but with release, like muscles unclenching after carrying a weight too long. Upstairs, movers were already assembling the bed frame. The smell of fresh paint lingered in the hallway. One wall of the living room remained bare white, unmarked, so I fetched a pencil and wrote a single date in the corner, the day the order was signed. I would paint over it later, but I wanted the memory sealed beneath color, a quiet time capsule. News of the purchase sparked fresh commentary online. Headlines swung between awe and skepticism. Some praised determination. Others accused me of flaunting wealth. I read none of it closely. Public opinion is a spinning weather vane. I had learned not to chase its shadow. But Daniel noticed. That evening, he attempted his own broadcast, an impromptu live stream from a cluttered apartment. He railed against the rigged system, claimed I had bribed the judge, insisted he would appeal. Viewers peppered him with questions about forged receipts, unpaid debts, and the sudden disappearance of his partner. The stream ended after 14 minutes when his connection failed, or perhaps when courage did. Clips circulated sliced into memes, his face frozen mid-rant captions mocking each contradictory phrase. The tag 1 million lies trended for a night. I did not join the laughter, though I understood why others did. Instead, I drafted an email to my accountant authorizing the transfer of $50,000, a fraction of my inheritance, into a scholarship fund for working single parents at the community college in my old borough. If Daniel taught me anything, it is that children should never become leverage in adult quarrels. The donation would not undo his choices, but it might lighten someone else's burden. Charity can be its own quiet revenge, turning poison into medicine. Near midnight, I stepped onto the terrace. The city sparkled, endless rows of windows blinking like fireflies. Wind tugged at my hair, cool and steady. I remembered standing in that same wind months earlier, heart knotted with dread. Now it brushed past, carrying nothing heavy away from me. Yet part of the story remained unfinished. Sanctions still loomed, and Daniel's financial house, long propped on borrowed beams, was listing. Rumor said he sought a defamation suit, grasping for any ledge to halt his slide. Harper assured me such an attempt would collapse under discovery, but even so, a final reckoning waited. I turned back to the living room lights warm against new walls and closed the sliding door. Tomorrow would bring lawyers, perhaps more headlines. Maybe another desperate video from Daniel. But tonight I slept on a mattress set directly on hardwood, listening to the distant river. I felt no triumph, only relief and a steady hum of resolve. Because revenge, like healing, is not a single moment. It is a series of deliberate breaths, each one calmer than the last. The next breath would come soon in a courtroom once more, where Daniel would try to claw back dignity he had already sold. And when that door closed, the echo would remind him, truth writes the last line, not the loudest voice. Daniel's final gambit arrived in a cream-colored envelope, the paper heavy, as if weight could lend it credibility. Defamation, the letter claimed. My press statement and Harper's filings had ruined his reputation, cost him business opportunities, exacted emotional damages that he valued at his attorney. Wrote this with a straight face, $5 million. I read the figure twice, then slid the envelope across Harper's desk. She laughed once softly, like someone appreciating an amateur magic trick that failed on the first flourish. Let him file, she said, eyes already parsing the document for holes. Discovery will be a spotlight he cannot survive. Discovery bank ledgers, exposed text chains, subpoenaed sworn depositions where perjury carries prison instead of ridicule. Daniel had thrived on shadows. Sunlight would finish what mockery started. Within a week, Harper countersued for malicious prosecution, attaching the forged clinic receipt as Exhibit A. 2 days later, the district attorney's office filed its own motion, attempted fraud upon the court. The civil suit and the criminal inquiry ran on parallel tracks, iron rails, bound for the same station. Daniel tried to derail them with interviews on fringe podcasts, spinning tales of elite conspiracies and backroom bribes. Each appearance handed prosecutors new contradictions. Meanwhile, creditors closed in. A luxury watch dealer sued for unpaid invoices. A private lender demanded repayment of a loan Daniel had taken against a business that never existed. One by one, doors locked. His apartment complex posted an eviction notice. Friends stopped returning calls. Even his parents, sweet people who once doted on him, released a statement distancing themselves from recent regrettable conduct. Courtroom 3 on Center Street heard the defamation claim first. The judge, gray-browed and unamused, asked Daniel's attorney to identify one false statement I had made. The young man shuffled pages, but produced none. Harper rose, presented affidavit after affidavit, the prenatal timeline, the altered receipt, the email in which Daniel coached his partner on playing sad. The judge dismissed the suit with prejudice, awarded me legal fees, and warned Daniel that future frivolous claims might result in sanctions. The gavel's crack sounded like a lid snapping shut. Yet the deeper reckoning came 3 weeks later in Criminal Part 17. I sat behind Harper as Assistant District Attorney Morales outlined the state's case, forging medical documents, submitting perjured testimony, attempting to defraud a spouse of assets in excess of $1 million. Daniel wore the same ill-fitting suit, but the smirk was gone. His new lawyer, a public defender, seasoned and sober, advised him to accept a plea. He refused. Trials promised spectacle. He still believed in last-minute miracles. The jury needed only 5 hours. Guilty on 2 counts of fraud, 1 of perjury. Sentencing would follow, but the verdict itself was a stone dropped into still water ripples, spread through every conversation that once doubted my resolve. Outside the courthouse, reporters formed a semicircle. I made a brief statement, 30 seconds, no flourishes, then walked away. The wind off the river felt cleaner than before. Bankruptcy court became Daniel's final stage. He listed debts that read like a catalog of longing luxury car leases, designer clothing lines, failed startups, unpaid child support to two separate women. Assets totaled less than a month of interest on my mortgage. The judge liquidated what little remained. The auction drew bargain hunters and a few schadenfreude tourists. I did not attend. On the first warm evening of May, Harper and I met for coffee near the Riverwalk. She toasted me with iced tea. "It is finished," she said. I thought of the pencil mark behind my living room paint, the date hidden beneath fresh color. Closure rarely arrives with trumpets. Sometimes it is a quiet chair on a balcony and a breeze free of dread. Yet closure, like revenge, invites reflection. I sent a handwritten apology to my mother for the distance our conflict had carved. She visited the penthouse soon after carrying lemon cookies in a tin, the same recipe she baked when I crammed for college finals. We sat at the kitchen island, sun falling across quartz, and spoke of ordinary things. Neighbors' dogs, a new fairy route, until the silence between topics felt safe enough to hold grief. Then we spoke of Daniel, of how trust bends, how it can also mend. Forgiveness began its slow work. As summer edged in, I hosted a small gathering, Harper, Renee, a few friends who had believed me when headlines wavered. We stood on the terrace, city lights flickering like distant campfires. Someone asked what I had learned. I sipped wine and considered. "That truth is quieter than lies," I said at last, "but it endures longer. And if you guard it patiently, it will outlive every shout against it." No one raised a glass. Instead, they nodded the way people do when words land on something solid. Conversation drifted to music, to books, to travel plans. Laughter carried into the warm night. Later alone, I wrote in my journal, "Revenge is not the opposite of mercy. Sometimes it is the path to it. Holding people to their actions reminds the rest of us that choices matter." I closed the notebook, set it beside the folded verdict, and slept through until morning, without dreams of courtrooms or forged receipts. Some tales end with thunder. Mine settled like a season, turning soft yet irreversible. Daniel would serve his sentence, then rebuild whatever life honesty allowed. I would live in mine, windows wide to the river, reminder enough that freedom tastes best when earned. The first leaf of autumn drifted onto my terrace the morning Daniel reported to begin his sentence. I noticed it from the kitchen window while I whisked eggs, a tiny fleck of amber resting on gray stone. There was a time I would have marked that date in my calendar, maybe even poured a second glass of wine to celebrate. Instead, I cracked pepper into the pan, breathed in the scent of butter, and felt nothing dramatic at all. Peace is rarely loud. After breakfast, I walked along Riverside Drive, jacket unbuttoned to the cool air. Couples strolled, a saxophonist practiced under an archway, and the city moved with its usual hum. Passing strangers had no clue a woman beside them had once been the headline of a scandal watched by millions. That anonymity felt like a freshly laundered sheet light, crisp and welcome. Work found its own rhythm again. I advised clients on retirement portfolios, helped a widow establish a trust for her grandchildren, reminded a young teacher that compound interest rewards patience above genius. Money talk can sound dry, yet underneath runs the same question that echoed in my courtroom battle. How do we guard what we earn without losing what we are? I never answered that for Daniel, but I answer it for myself each day by pairing prudence with generosity. In late September, the scholarship fund I seeded admitted its first class 4 parents juggling night shifts, diapers, and textbooks. The dean invited me to speak. I told the students they were proof that grit outruns pity, and that a ledger balanced with honesty is more valuable than any windfall snatched by deceit. When applause ended, one young father shook my hand and said, "You turned your story into a ladder for the rest of us." I carried that sentence home like a small, glowing stone in my pocket. On a rainy Sunday, my mother visited again, bringing photographs from her attic, sepia wedding portraits, my kindergarten drawing of a purple giraffe, Daniel's smile frozen beside mine at some forgotten holiday. We sorted them into piles, keep, share, release. Letting go of a picture can feel like tearing a page from history, yet we discovered that memory survives without paper. By evening, the trash bag of old snapshots weighed less than a loaf of bread, though the act of discarding them felt monumental. Not everything healed. My sister's apology remained polite but distant. She still struggled between envy and remorse. Some relatives never revisited their earlier judgment, choosing silence over admission of error. I learned to meet them where they stood and waste no breath, urging them forward. The heart cannot be repossessed the way Daniel's car was. It must be offered, or not, at its owner's pace. As autumn deepened, so did my contentment in small rituals, watering a stubborn ficus, learning to bake sourdough, mailing postcards to college friends I had neglected. Most nights I sat on the terrace with tea, watching freighters glide upriver, their lights winking like slow constellations. I thought less about revenge and more about stewardship of money, of time, of grace. One Wednesday, I spoke by phone with Harper, who was weighing an offer to teach trial strategy. You could turn a class of students into a legion of calm assassins, I told her, laughing. Perhaps, she said, but first I might vacation somewhere without a courthouse in sight. We promised dinner when she returned, the easy kind of promise made after a storm has passed. People still write me letters. Some thank me for standing firm. Others ask how to face their own manipulative relative. I answer when I can, telling them what I learned: keep records, trust, patience, choose counsel that values truth over theatrics, and remember that self-respect is not arrogance. I also warn them that winning rarely looks like a movie climax. More often, it resembles a leaf quiet on stone, signaling a new season. And now, dear listener, I turn to you. If my journey through betrayal, humiliation, and hard-won justice stirred something in you, let me know. Did I make the right choices, or would you have taken a different road? If you believe I handled Daniel fairly, comment right. If you see another path I should have walked, share your idea below. Your stories keep these conversations alive, and who knows, your insight might become the compass for someone standing where I once stood. Thank you for lending your ears and hearts to this tale. May your own ledgers balance in every sense that counts, and may every door you close make room for one that opens toward peace.